The age for starting school is getting earlier and earlier. What's more, the traditional preschool and kindergarten environments are increasingly concentrated on academics. A recent study titled, "Is Kindergarten the New First Grade?" compared kindergarten in 1998 to 99 with kindergarten in 2010 to 2011 and found most kindergarten classrooms now functioning much like first grade did a decade previous, leaving us to wonder, is preschool the new kindergarten? In 1998 and 99, only 29% of kindergarten teachers said that children should learn to read in kindergarten. In 2010 and 11, this rose to 78%. In 98 and 99, 53% of kindergartners were in full-day kindergarten programs. In 2010 and 11, 81%. Time for art and music has dwindled, along with sand and water tables or science areas with objects to manipulate. In 98 and 99, 48% of kindergartners teachers considered reading fluently too much to expect of kindergartners. In 2010 and 11, only 10% of teachers did. In 2010 and 11, 90% of kindergartners were being taught to read fluently. In 2010 and 11, 97% of kindergartners were in classes composing and writing complete sentences was a needed skill. 99% of 2010 and 11 kindergartners were in classes learning capitalization and punctuation. 84% of 2010 and 11 kindergarten teachers feel that attending preschool is very important for success in kindergarten. Many kindergarten teachers consider it very important or essential that children entering kindergarten already know how to use pencils and paintbrushes, know most of the letters of the alphabet, and can count to 20. Now, many administrators, parents, and teachers are thrilled with these new developments, while others say that the little tykes might not quite be ready yet. Is the push for earlier and more academics all beneficial, or might there be some other factors involved? A significant body of scientific research with input from top developmental psychologists and neurophysiologists say that there are some unintended consequences to early formal education. They tell us that while kids may be learning, they're also missing out on proper development. They suggest that the price to pay isn't worth it, that early academics is doing more harm than good. The weight of evidence suggests that an academic setting before the age 8 or 10 is actually damaging to the mind. And I believe from my research that it is Satan's master tactic for destroying good thinking abilities. That is tactic number 10, early formal education. And it's causing a lot of other damage in the process. How and why? Let's find out. So what's this? A neuron, more commonly known as a brain cell. It's what your brain's made out of, and it's what you're using to listen to me right now. You were born with about 100 billion of these. But a pile of neurons are just useless without a means of connecting with each other. That's where neuronal maturation comes in. As neurons specialize, they begin reaching out by means of dendrites and synapses. And here's an amazing fact. At peak periods of development during childhood, as many as 1.8 million synapses are being formed per second. Then, as the neurons continue to mature, they undergo a process called myelination. Myelin is a dielectric or electrically insulating material that coats the axon of the neuron and speeds information transfer. Previous to myelination, a neuron is virtually unusable or inefficient at best. If messages travel at all, they move quite slowly. Messages literally jump along a myelinated neuron, however. Myelination speeds information transfer over that of an unmyelinated neuron by about 100 times. Myelinated neurons can transmit messages at about 100 yards per second. Trying to force information transfer over an unmyelinated neuron is a futile effort. Furthermore, asking an undeveloped brain section to perform a task for which it is not ready can lead to problems. This myelination process occurs in stages and on a fairly set schedule. At birth, all but the most essential bodily functions are unmyelinated, and neurons are basically just this confused and unconnected mass. Through the developmental process, this mass of neurons becomes increasingly organized, connected, and then myelinated. Here's a brief overview of brain development. From conception to about 15 months, we have basic brain development and myelination. From 15 months to 4.5 years, we have limbic system and relationship development. From 4.5 to 7 years, we have gestalt or right hemisphere elaboration and myelination. I should note that boys have a slower growth period during these stages than girls, usually about 2 years difference, and they need a longer period of time with gestalt or right hemisphere elaboration, especially through movement and emotional development. From 7 to 9 years, we see logic or left hemisphere elaboration. At 8 years begins the frontal lobe elaboration. 9 to 12 years, increased corpus callosum myelination. 12 to 16 years, a hormonal emphasis in the brain. 16 to 21 years, they're refining cognitive skills. And from 21 on, our brains still continue to grow with elaboration and refinement of the frontal lobes. The myelination process affects all areas of the development, but I'd like to turn your attention to 3 specific regions of the brain: the right and left hemispheres, the frontal lobe. These regions of the brain are of particular interest to all of brain development, but of particular interest to the study of your child's developing mind. The brain's divided into 2 lobes: the right or gestalt hemisphere and the left or the logic hemisphere. Both hemispheres are involved in all mental processes, but they do have some specific functions. The right hemisphere deals predominantly with images, rhythm, emotion, intuition, imagination, creativity, feeling, faith, belief, and large motor control. The left hemisphere deals predominantly with detail, parts and processes of language, linear patterns, logic, critical thinking, numbers, reasoning, and many other primarily academic thinking processes. The left hemisphere is also very important for formal school activities. Now, a third area of the brain, the frontal lobe, is also crucial for academic processes. The posterior portion, which contains the primary motor cortex, is considered to be the primary motor area and controls specific muscles all over the body. The frontal lobe controls 3 functions which are very important for school activities: fine motor development, inner speech, and fine motor eye teaming and tracking for foveal focus, which is 2-dimensional focus. Fine motor development. Any ideas what this is important for? Writing and skills refinement. Inner speech. This is crucial for internalizing concepts in reading and especially controlling social behavior. Foveal focus is essential for reading. A page is 2-dimensional, even a picture. Now, let's look back at that schedule of development. When do these areas myelinate? We see that from 4.5 to 7 years is the right hemisphere elaboration. From 7 to 9 years begins the left hemisphere, and at 8 years, the frontal lobe begins. Notice that each hemisphere has its own schedule of development. The right hemisphere organizes and myelinates from 4.5 to 7 to 10 in girls and through age 10 and 12 in boys. The left hemisphere myelinates after the right between the ages of 7 and 9. The frontal lobe, including the primary motor cortex, is critical for 3 skills crucial to academic success. It begins myelination at about 8 years of age. I do want to make a note that the left hemisphere begins at about 7 or 8, even 10 in boys. It will continue to refine throughout life, while the right hemisphere is concentrated in the early years. So what's a typical school starting age? 5, 6? Yeah. Preschool starts at 2 or 3 sometimes, kindergarten at 4 or 5, school at 5 or 6. Any of these ages are long before the myelination of the left hemisphere and the frontal lobe starts, which are brain regions critical for academic thinking. So what happens when kids are given academics before these brain regions are developed? Is it possible to accelerate learning? As it turns out, a lot of damage is done. Asking an undeveloped brain section to perform a task for which it is not ready can lead to significant problems. Let's assess some of the damage. First of all, functional disorganization. Young minds are very plastic. It's called neural plasticity. To put this in simpler terms, the brain is moldable. It's shapeable. A child's brain is designed to allow them to change and to adapt to their environment, just learning as they go. The environment literally molds the development of the brain, and this is a great blessing and a great responsibility to parents. This amazing plasticity allows the brain to compensate for damage, such as a brain injury, by supplementing other neurons or entire brain regions even, in the place of the ones that are missing. Now, the replacement regions are not as efficient as the originals often, but they kind of make do. This plasticity, though, can lead to trouble when we try to force academics before the brain is ready. Keeping this idea in your mind, let's consider a 5-year-old boy in math class for the first time. Where do mathematical thinking abilities take place? How about reading abilities and fine motor skills for holding a pencil? Yeah, the left hemisphere and the frontal lobe. These areas are not yet myelinated at age 5, though. So given what we know about neuroplasticity, what do you think the brain does in this case? That's right, it compensates by using an already developed area of the brain, which will be a lower thinking center at this age. This is an actual physiological occurrence. If a task is asked of it for which the corresponding region is not matured, it will form neural routes through lower, more developed sections, resulting in almost permanent organizational damage. Trying to force a child to learn a concept he or she is not ready for can actually do damage to the unmyelinated brain. According to Dr. Jane Healy, educational psychologist, before brain regions are myelinated, they do not operate efficiently. For this reason, trying to make children master academic skills for which they do not have the requisite maturations may result in mixed up patterns of learning. If the right brain system isn't yet available or working smoothly, forcing may create a functional organization in which less adaptive, lower systems are trained to do the work. Now, Dr. Healy called this functional organization. I'd like to give it a little play on words and call it functional disorganization. It's functional because the brain can still manage to complete the task, but it's disorganized because it's not the original organization that God designed. But here's the problem. Functional disorganization is permanent. This isn't something that just works itself out later in life. Trying to drill higher level learning into immature brains may force them to perform with lower level systems and thus impair the skill in question. Now, a child should always be learning. From birth to age 8 is the time to be learning social skills, spirituality, morality, cause to effect, all things practical. Academics, on the other hand, are not efficiently learned until after age 8 or 10. If a child is required to develop basic skills in reading, writing, arithmetic, and language arts before the various functions of the brain balance out, he will often give the impression that he is retarded or mentally disabled. Any learning that has to be pushed into a child may end up doing more harm than good, according to Dr. Jane Healy. Plunged daily into a fire of inappropriate expectation, children's early promise shrivels, and non-learning becomes a habit. They may be labeled, treated, exhorted, and eventually tutored, but the basic issue remains unchanged. The school and the child are on different schedules. It is important to remember that this functional disorganization is permanent. The neural routes through the lower thinking parts of the brain do not get changed to higher thinking centers at a later age. This is based on the brain wanting to organize. At an early age, it uses the experiences that it encounters to develop the organization of the mind. A child may be able to do well in school, yet because the neural routes for most academic processes have been formed through the lower thinking centers, they often won't be able to progress to true higher thinking and reasoning abilities. Let me illustrate that with a simple example. We know that 2 plus 3 equals 5. And we also know that if I had 2 apples and you gave me 3 more, I would have 5 apples. Well, functional disorganization is kind of like knowing that 2 plus 3 equals 5 on paper, but not understanding that it's exactly the same as 2 apples and 3 apples. Now, obviously, this is a very simplistic example, and most people understand this particular one. But this is the principle. A child started early can learn specific examples and get specific results, processes, steps, answers, but not understand general concepts at work. Many things, according to Dr. Jane Healy, many things that seem ridiculously obvious to adults are not clear to children. We can explain until we're blue in the face, or we can insist the child memorize what we want her to know and wonder why she has forgotten the next day. One task that is difficult for primary students is the missing addend, so popular in early math books, like 3 plus what equals 8. Teachers and parents alike are frustrated because at this age, most students can learn to perform this operation only by rote. The minute they have to remember or organize it themselves, they forget because they never really understood it. This places a limit on what their minds can do. God does not want to place a limit on what our minds are capable of. He wants our minds to be continually growing, be able to think deeply. Children started early will often not progress farther than what they are taught. They can be taught something, but they often won't be able to figure things out for themselves. Children who begin academics at a later age don't develop this problem, though. When their minds are ready, they take off like a rocket. More on this later. This is not to say that God cannot work with our minds and help them adapt, change, and grow throughout life, no matter what has happened in the past. Early academics, though, are not his ideal. And let's seek to work with his ideal. The disposition and habits of youth will be very likely to be manifested in mature manhood. You may bend a tree into almost any shape you choose, and if it remains and grows as you have bent it, it will be a deformed tree. It will ever tell of the injury and abuse received at your hands. You may, after it has had years of growth, try to straighten the tree, but all efforts will prove unavailing. It will ever be a crooked tree. Vision. Another impact of early formal education is on the development of the eye. The capability for eye teaming and foveal vision does not develop until about age 8 to 10, 9 to 11, somewhere in there. Eye teaming refers to the ability to use both eyes to focus on a subject. Foveal vision is two-dimensional vision. This type of vision is essential for reading. After all, a page is two-dimensional. Control for these functions is mainly located in the frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe does not begin myelination until approximately age 8. Vision is a very whole brain process. Less than 5% of vision actually occurs in the eyes. The rest of it is in the mind. And for full vision to occur, information from all cerebral lobes must be accessed. Even though a single clear visual image may be received by the eye, a child still may not be able to decode printed material because of deficiencies in organization and interpretation in the central nervous system due to lack of maturation. Also, before age 7, the ciliary bodies in the eye that control the shape of the lens are short to allow maximum three-dimensional and peripheral vision, and distance vision too. At about age 7, the ciliary body is lengthened to allow for more foveal or two-dimensional vision. There have been studies done on unschooled indigenous peoples, and they've found that these peoples often have astounding distance vision and three-dimensional vision. Furthermore, the eyeball is not completely shaped with collagen fibers until approximately age 9. As a result, periods of reading without relaxing the focus into the distance can cause inflammation and enlargement of the eyeball, leading to myopia or nearsightedness. Placing a child in an environment requiring a lot of reading, writing, or looking at two-dimensional objects goes against natural mental and physiological development and will only serve to create discomfort and frustration. Formal schooling before age 8 to 10 places demands on the eyes that are unreasonable and damaging. Vision problems can result. A study of Eskimo families in Alaska, shortly after Alaska became a state and started requiring schooling for its children, found 58% of children had myopia, while the grandparents and parents who had not gone to school at an early age had virtually none. According to a December 14, 2009 Bloomberg News article, the rate of nearsightedness in the U.S. has increased 66% since the 1970s. According to the LA Times, rates of myopia, which is difficulty seeing distant objects, are soaring. The trend is matched in many other countries, causing eye doctors to wonder what could be causing the decline in human vision. Well, eye doctors might be wondering, but child developmentalists are not. The eyes need to actively experience the world as a whole for vision to develop fully. The lack of movement that results from early schooling is another source of problems. Physical activity is key to proper development. Studies have shown that the part of the brain known as the cerebellum, while formerly thought to only control movement, is also responsible for learning and cognitive activity. In fact, it is the processing center for both movement and learning. Studies have found strong links between the cerebellum and memory, spatial perception, language, attention, emotion, nonverbal cues, decision-making, social interaction, higher thinking abilities, and the ability to perform repetitive activities like handwriting. All of these are necessary for academic success. Physical activity greatly aids in the development of the cerebellum and has also been found to enhance growth and greater connections between the neurons. While many schools have been catching on to the benefits of play, the binding restraints of standards leave the amount of time for free play and exploration to a minimum, far below what is necessary to healthy minds. Small children should be left free as lambs to run out of doors, to be free and happy, and should be allowed the most favorable opportunities to lay the foundation for sound constitutions. Now, language development and inner speech. Another area, language development, is damaged by early education. Language development occurs best when the child is free to talk out loud. The reason for this is that until age 8, children do not have good capabilities of inner speech. In other words, they do most of their thinking out loud. A word of explanation here, though. Inner speech is not a New Age belief or of an inner voice or anything like that. As used here, this is a scientific term used to describe the physical activity of being able to think and reason through things without having to say it out loud. Because this is mainly controlled by the frontal lobe, young children don't have this ability developed until approximately age 8 to 10. To learn well, children must be able to talk out loud and as they think and reason through things. Children can't quite internalize language, and they desperately need to talk for good language development. Good language, like the synapses that make it possible, is gained only from interactive engagement. Children need to talk as well as to hear. I am convinced, says Dr. Healy, that a major reason so many students today have difficulty with problem solving, abstract reasoning, and writing coherently is that they have insufficiently developed mechanisms of inner speech. Why not? Why do they have insufficiently developed mechanisms of inner speech? Because it was damaged by early academics. Early formal education hinders the development of inner speech in 3 specific ways. Number 1, children's brains are bombarded with too much noise and overprogramming in an academic setting. How can children develop this inner speech if they're never allowed to experience the quiet time necessary to process it, to hear it? Number 2, children need to be shown how to develop inner speech. This is best done by individual adult attention. Adults need to spend quality, individual time with children. Individual is the key. Encouraging him or her to reason through things, to think them out. In an academic environment where children are talked to and not with, and in a large classroom where they don't get the individual attention from adults, they miss out on developing inner speech. Number 3, children need to talk to themselves to develop inner speech. This is most important. And they need to be able to hold meaningful one-on-one conversations with adults. School just doesn't allow that. I mean, just imagine a classroom full of kids chattering away. It would be chaos. Inner speech is essential for good language development and other academic processes, but it's also important for many other areas, not the least of which are behavior management, which many parents, I'm sure, would appreciate. Learned helplessness. The child who is required to learn things before he is ready may quickly tire of them, or he may become anxiety-ridden and so frustrated that he will not try at all. When a child is made to study academics before the higher levels of the brain are myelinated, the difficulty they experience may create a learned helplessness. A child might later in life be perfectly capable of learning something, but because they were not developmentally able to grasp it when it was taught, they now believe, whether consciously or subconsciously, that he can't learn it. And this is a very common problem today. Dr. Healy says, I wonder how many children decide they are dumb about certain subjects when the truth is that someone simply laid the learning on too soon in a form other than the one they needed to receive it in at the time. Many children acquire learned helplessness at school when they are confronted with learning tasks that are too difficult for their level of ability. Some children, for example, fail to learn to read because the way in which it is taught confronts them with a task they cannot comprehend or control. Under these circumstances, the learned helplessness response is produced and the child retreats from any experience having to do with reading, according to Dr. Elkind. I would contend, Dr. Healy says, that much of today's school failure results from academic expectations for which students' brains were not prepared, but which were bulldozed into them anyway. We create tremendous frustration in the brains of young children by starting them too early. This can create school failure. Every year, 1.2 million students drop out of school. That's a student every 26 seconds, 7,000 a day. And this can occur to different degrees. It doesn't necessarily have to be school dropout. Many students will start off great, but they burn out within a few years. If they would have waited till their brains are ready, though, school would be a joy, not a frustration to them. Sadly, these children are accused of not trying when it's the parents' or educators' fault for not trying to understand the development of the child. Simply making demands on undeveloped or unprepared brain systems is a mistake. So our efforts must be tempered by patience and preparation until the child's mental transmission systems are equal to the task. Otherwise, we risk frustration, inferior skill development, and an abiding distaste and incompetence for the activity, says Dr. Healy. Dr. Elkind, young children believe that adults are all-knowing and all-wise. This is perfectly normal. God created them that way. It's good that they think this way and trust their parents implicitly. It prepares them to trust God later in life. However, we shouldn't betray this trust when we place children in school at an early age and cause them to blame themselves. As Dr. Elkind says, young children believe that adults are all-knowing and all-wise. When we confront them with tasks for which they are not ready, such as tests, workbooks, and homework, these children blame themselves for failure. If this all-wise, all-knowing person tells me I should be able to do this and I can't, there must be something wrong with me. We are sending too many children to school too early to learn they are too dumb to be there. Learned helplessness is a fundamental cause of many learning disabilities. Many neurophysiologists and educators believe that early formal education is the root of many of today's educational problems, including most learning disabilities. Learned helplessness can transfer into other areas of life, too. Studies have shown that children who develop learned helplessness in one area soon develop in other areas until it becomes a way of thought. Such children may become withdrawn or listless or apathetic and seem to lose all motivation for learning and for relating to others. There's a strong spiritual application here. A lack of love for learning can apply to learning spiritual things like Bible study. I want to reiterate one thing here. Learned helplessness is often not obvious and may not show outwardly. It might take several years of academics to show, but when it becomes obvious, it will be too late. The damage has already been done. A young child might seem to be learning great, they may seem to love academics, but the damage will be seen in later years. And consider the spiritual implications here. Do you want your child to love to learn, to love to study God's Word? Let's encourage that by not squashing it at a young age. Another major cause of learned helplessness is the frequent testing of young children. In our eagerness to find out their abilities and what level they are, we do more harm than good. The memorizing necessary for these tests is a linear process that does not require whole brain use. Rote memory does not require thinking, according to Carla Hannaford. From an early age, children are taught that they either know something or they don't, instead of learning to think and reason and find an answer. I have personally worked with children in many schools who demonstrate this clearly. When they come across the problem that they don't know the answer to, no thought is given to the fact that they could figure it out. They simply say, I don't know, or I can't. You can ask them, can you figure it out? And you can ask them to think about it even. And they say, I don't know how. This is a direct result of the test-driven, results-oriented, performance-based system that we've put them in at an early age. The tragic effects of this schooling are shown in a study showing that at age 11, only 5% of the population is at a formal reasoning level. Only 1/4 have reached this level by age 14, and in adults, only half are fully functional formal thinkers. But won't the child be delayed? That's a good question to ask. Children who start academics after age 8 usually wind up far ahead of the early starters. When children are given time for their minds to develop, they will experience much less frustration when academics do begin, and they will learn much faster because they are ready to learn it. In a study of 300 individuals who started school at about age 8 or later, all quickly caught up with their classes and in most cases performed well above the class average. Entering school early usually results in less than optimum achievement, but children who enter later are more likely to achieve at a higher level. There's been found substantial agreement among school entrance age researchers that children who enter school later are significantly higher in academic achievement than those who enter earlier. Learning problems might thus be avoided, since forcing instruction on an unready child can result in learning skills with little transfer value or in turning off learning altogether. Individuals who entered school from 2 to 5 years later than the customary age of 6 or 7 reported no difficulty in completing elementary school at the usual age or even younger. Apparently, these students did not have outstanding intelligence. Some could have even been considered disadvantaged because of living in isolated areas or in countries other than their homelands. The common factor in all cases was later school entrance. Most late starts, usually without formal training before their first enrollment, quickly catch up academically and often pass their more school-experienced peers. And the late starters generally excel in behavior, sociality, and leadership. The studies are clear. They will not only catch up, but they'll do better. If a child waits to begin school until the brain is ready, All of the learning necessary for success in high school can be accomplished in only 2 or 3 years of formal school study. Research actually indicates that it only takes, if the brain is ready, it only takes about 30 hours, 30 contact hours, to learn reading to a college proficient level. So why are we wasting our children's time by spending 12 plus years in the schoolroom and doing damage in the process if it's not even necessary? This may seem extreme to a conventionally oriented mind, but it's strongly supported by history and research. Besides, consider how the current educational system is doing. International assessments comparing math and science found U.S. students at rock bottom, particularly in understanding of concepts and more complex interpretation of data. Most American 17-year-olds were poorly prepared to handle jobs requiring technical skills, and only 7% could handle college-level science courses. A cover story in Fortune magazine said, "In a high-tech age where nations increasingly compete on brain power, American schools are producing an army of illiterates." According to one bank manager, new tellers can't add and subtract well enough to balance their own checkbooks. An advertising firm in Chicago admitted that only 1 applicant in 10 meets the minimum literacy standard for male clerk jobs. Motorola Incorporated provided statistics showing that 80% of all applicants screened nationally fail a test of 7th grade English and 5th grade math. According to the National Center for Education Statistics' 2002 report called Adult Literacy in America, 21 to 23% of adults function at the lowest level of literacy, meaning they were either completely illiterate or they could function at very basic levels. Another 25 to 28% were found to be low-level literate, meaning they could get by in life, but they weren't really going to be enjoying reading any great literary works. Tasks in the survey involving the use of numbers found equally appalling results. That is nearly 50% of the population either illiterate or functioning at low levels of literacy. Interestingly, though, nearly all of them said that they were proficient in the English language. This is not perceived literacy here. This is statistical. Only 18 to 21% were found to be fully functionally literate at the highest level. This is what is happening in the push for earlier and earlier academics. Now, of course, there are many more factors involved, but a major push in our educational system in recent years has been for earlier and earlier academics, and we're seeing the appalling results. Compare this to Denmark and Finland and some other Scandinavian countries where children don't begin academic study until about age 7, sometimes not beginning formal school study as we know it in America until age 9. In some countries, they're not even tested until age 14. These countries boast nearly 100% literacy. In one study, Finland beat 39 other countries to come out tops in math, science, and reading. There's a story of a school administrator told by Sir Ken Robinson, the educational advisor. The school administrator in the U.S. was at a meeting where there was a school administrator from Finland. And the administrator from the U.S. asked the administrator from Finland, "Well, what are you doing about the dropout rate?" And the administrator from Finland kind of chuckled to himself and said, "We don't have one." But socialization, I mean, don't children need the socialization that school offers? Don't children need to be with others of the same age? I'd like to refer to something I talked about in the previous session regarding this: age segregation. Placing children of the same age actually has the opposite effect as intended. When children of the same age are grouped together, they are given no opportunity to grow and to expand their point of view. Because they're brought up in an environment in which everyone else sees things at the same angle, they will struggle to relate to others in a meaningful way. This cultivates many social problems. Does anyone notice the struggle that children have to communicate with adults many times? I'm sure we've noticed that children kept at home until a later age, homeschoolers especially, don't usually have this problem. After all, though, I mean, remember, are we raising children to be children or to be adults? To communicate with other children or to be able to conduct meaningful interaction in business circles with other adults? The effects of loving, individual, adult attentiveness go far beyond cognitive development. Many studies show a strong relationship between individual attentiveness and emotional stability, as well as positive behavior. I once conducted a study on a 5-year-old boy who, though he had almost constant access to siblings and to other children, was given very little adult attentiveness, and he was suffering from severe anger, emotional, and behavioral problems. After 3 months of twice-weekly visits, in which we would just do simple activities together, I would talk with him and show interest in him. After those 3 months, almost no anger problems were present, and marked improvements were shown in emotional health, in behavior, and in cognitive development. Other extensive psychological research support this. The attachment theories of Bowlby and Ainsworth have both shown the detrimental effects of separation from parents and the tremendous benefit of strong parent-child attachment. A child relates to people and to the world primarily through interaction with parents or parent surrogates. Even the best daycare cannot completely neutralize the negative social, emotional, and cognitive effects of mother-child discontinuity. When the child is allowed to develop a strong bond with an adult, especially a parent, a much more emotionally stable and socially competent child will be the results. Memory and thinking skills, though. Consider the type of learning you want your child to engage in. The brain feeds on what it is given. Formal schooling uses a very linear thinking process. It doesn't teach whole brain problem-solving skills. But what about memory? Won't a child miss out on the training of the memory that occurs in early education? The North Queensland Aborigines, for example, recite a song by memory that takes 5 nights to complete. Primitive peoples can observe a herd of several hundred animals and detect the absence of a single animal and know which one it is without counting. Many of their vocabularies are full of names for very detailed aspects of the world around them, while the schooled person depends heavily on external signs such as the written word to hold knowledge for him. The primitive native depends on memory. Every detail of a landscape is remembered with what seems to be a photographic memory, even the first time passing through. Though most children have an eidetic memory, it is rare among schooled adults, but not among primitive, non-schooled adults. So it seems that a lack of schooling actually encourages good memorization skills. Are you wanting to help your child memorize scripture? It seems these primitive peoples might be onto something. I've personally seen many children who have started school at a later age that have astounding memories. I want to touch on the effect on boys. Because of the approximately 2-year lag of brain development in boys as compared to girls, all the effects we've just discussed are intensified in boys. According to the educator, researcher, and best-selling author Michael Gurian, boys today are not learning as well as girls. Boys receive 70% of the D's and F's given to all students. Boys cause 90% of classroom discipline problems. 80% of all high school dropouts are boys. Millions of American boys are on Ritalin and other mind-bending control drugs, and 3 out of 4 students labeled learning disabled are boys. The right hemisphere is busy developing during the first 8 years of life in girls, but often during the first 10 or even 12 years in boys, and this places them at a greater academic disadvantage than their female counterparts. I'd like to make a couple more points on this topic. Learning versus teaching. Often when a child is placed in an academic setting early in life, he or she can be taught something and will seem to learn it. But because the thinking is being redirected through the lower thinking regions of the brain, in reality, they're learning it by rote, and they're not yet able to understand the concept behind what they just learned. When this is done, it can damage the brain. The child may never be able to understand the concept later in life as fully as if they would have learned it when the mind was ready. They might learn specific examples, but they'll struggle to apply it to other situations. This is the sad part of most preschool and kindergarten curricula. They might seem to be teaching something, but the students are failing to learn. A child might be taught something, or he might learn it through experience and mental maturity. In one method, a child is taught, in the other, the child learns. Another point, he likes school. Let's say you come into the kitchen one morning and find your child helping himself to breakfast. He's got no fresh fruit, no whole grains, nothing healthy at all. Just a mountain of vanilla ice cream swimming in chocolate syrup. At this point, your spouse walks in and says, "What are you letting him do?" And you say, "Oh, honey, he likes it." No? I mean, do we give our children everything they want just because they like it? There are very few children who, given the choice, would not prefer hands-on outdoor learning over academics. But even if they did, do we want to give them something that's harmful to them? And reading. It is a myth that children need to learn reading early or they'll never learn it. Numerous studies have found late starters actually pass up the earlier ones and have better reading comprehension and fluency. Furthermore, pushing reading at an early age can actually create poor reading skills, poor expression when reading, and poor comprehension. Some children may learn at an early age, and this is okay. If they do, remember that the eyes aren't ready until about age 8. So keep reading to a minimum and encourage your child to spend more time outdoors. As mentioned earlier, research indicates that it only takes about 30 hours to learn reading to a college proficient level. I've personally, in my studies, met children who have learned to read in their teens and caught right up in a couple of months. Lastly, early formal schooling is one of the biggest causes of the now common lack of spiritual interest, especially in boys and men in society today. The right hemisphere is the one most responsible for faith, belief, and spirituality. The early years are a critical period for the right hemisphere. I'll explain more about this in the Parents' Best Curriculum session, but essentially it will miss out on essential development if it does not get the right experiences at the right time. And those experiences are learning cause to effect, spirituality, practical learning. Furthermore, pressure to develop the left hemisphere through academics actually suppresses the development of the right hemisphere. Concentrating on academics during this critical period in the early years prevents and suppresses the development of the right hemisphere and is a direct link to the lack of spiritual interest, especially in men today. It's the analogy of using one muscle, strengthening one muscle and not the other. With waves of young people leaving the church today, it's become a sad reality that early academics are suppressing the spirituality of our young people. In the early education of children, many parents and teachers fail to understand that the greatest attention needs to be given to the physical constitution, that a healthy condition of body and mind may be secured. It has been the custom to encourage children to attend school when they were mere babes needing a mother's care. Parents should be the only teachers of their children until they have reached 8 or 10 years of age. As fast as their minds can comprehend it, the parents should open before them God's great book of nature. The only schoolroom for children until 8 or 10 years of age should be the open air, amid the opening flowers and nature's beautiful scenery and their most familiar textbook, The Treasures of Nature. These lessons imprinted upon the minds of young children amid the pleasant, attractive scenes of nature will not soon be forgotten. Early academics in the classroom is no place for the young child. We could avoid so many problems and make our children and ourselves so much happier by following the original schedule of the designer, God Himself. Our children will thank us for it, and they'll even come out ahead in the long run.